right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rami Mroueh, and I will be the co-host for today's session on the Trump dilemma. So we start off with a quote. For myself, I am an optimist. It does not seem to be much use to be anything else. Winston Churchill. Quite the controversial figure here in Britain. So we start off. I just want to start off by introducing our panelists. We have Dr. Brandon Federer. He's the head of programming at Shared Studios and honors faculty at Arizona State University, a writer, performer, storyteller, educator, an expert facilitator with a doctorate in intercultural communication. He's also the one who trained me to handle a majlis. So I hope I do this right. So yes, he's also a featured speaker at the Dubai 2020 World Majlis Expo and is a Salzburg Global Fellow. I will move on to the next speaker. Hopefully he will be joining us shortly. Dr. Premanand Mishra is currently an assistant professor at the Nelson Mandela Center for Peace and Conflict Resolution at Jamia Millia Islamia. That's fun to say. In New Delhi, India. He has done his PhD in international studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, and his research focuses on the complexities of international relations and peace and conflict studies. He also has previously worked with Columbia University's Jordan chapter and as a financial correspondent at Business Standard Chennai and at UNICEF India as a state communication and documentation consultant. Next up, we have Alexandra Bowman, a designer and writer from Washington, D.C., who became a huge fan of political cartooning during the 2020 election season. She served as the political cartoonist for John Kerry and John Kasich founded environmental organizations World War Zero. Her work has been published in the BBC News, Puffin Books, Georgetown University Institute for Politics and Public Service, the National Wildlife Foundation, among many others. She's also a proud member of the National Press Club, the National Cartoonist Society, and the Society of Illustrators and the Association of American Editorial Cartoonists. All right, now we are going to start this conversation with the Trump effect, the dilemma of immigration policies in America. So I will now turn it over to our guests, and I would like to get first of all Dr. Brandon's views on the Trump situation in America.
Hi, Rami. Thank you for having me. I join with a certain level of expertise in facilitation, communication, and dialogue, but I do not have expertise in Trump policies, other than being an American and living through kind of the aftermath of policy decisions or proposed policy decisions. In terms of the current policies around immigration specifically, outside of some kind of boisterous rhetoric and the kind of removal of people on much more expensive planes to countries of origin, a lot of the policies remain the same from the first Trump administration and really remain the same during the Biden administration. There's really been more of a shift in rhetoric than a shift in action. The Biden administration was also, removing folks back to countries of origin, especially if folks were criminals. I think what's changed here is that we're removing a number of people who have not engaged in criminal acts, and we're doing so by taking military aircraft, which cost the taxpayer exorbitantly more than others. I think where Trump's policies are particularly concerning for me, and I'm really anxious to hear from folks on the panel who I think are much more experts than I am, has to do with the kind of shift away from our European allies, the reconnection with Russia, and kind of a change in attitude as it relates to being a good neighbor versus being kind of a strong dictator. So I'm gonna step back and let the folks on the panel with a bit more expertise talk about it. But I think, as an American citizen, I see a lot of the policies that are enacted around immigration right now to be similar to those under Biden, with the rhetoric being much harsher, which, as someone who studies words have consequences. And then just a few things that have kind of shifted in terms of the ways that we're dealing with migrants and asylum seekers in the United States.
Thank you very much, Brandon. I'll turn it over to Dr. Prem.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Am I audible to you guys?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you loud
Yeah.
and clear. So
So
we'd like to
good.
get your thoughts on the Trump effect on his immigration policies,
Yeah.
if you will.
First of all, thank you for having me and this opportunity. A good evening from New Delhi, and whichever part of the world you are, welcome and hello. Everybody's talking about Trump across the world. Every newspaper, every website, every policymaker, academicians, politicians. And I think this, to sum up, to before to even say what about Trump and its impact, there is a chaos everywhere. Nobody knows, it's unprecedented, unpredictable. Even in Fukuyama's word that even on the scales of the kind of precedents the U.S. had, he is one of its kind, and nobody knows how to behave with him, to reason with him. And across the world, that leaders are also rushing to him. I mean, the Europeans are in completely in shock. South Asian countries have no clue how to deal and even to reach out to him. The only country is very happy about, in every sense of Trump as a Trump, is Putin and Russia.
Mhm.
And So that's the first thing. Second thing is that there is a lot of chaos in domestic politics, bipartisan politics in U.S. itself. I mean, look at the Democrats; they have no clue how to even basically approach him. Look at the kind of arguments and the sloganeering and the kind of vocabulary, the new grammar of American politics with the Donald Trump has arrived in. That too is going to be a kind of lot of PhD thesis will be written in the Ivy League colleges in later 10 years or decades later. That were the Trump administration by populism, or what it was the sort of a kind of a last, popular president of the United States will definitely going to shift the what we call the U.S. hegemony. And in that way, this political crisis is not for beyond United States. It is for the Americans too. In which direction that going to really impact them, that's the jury is still out on that. But thirdly, and when you assess the impact, the location becomes very important. If you are an European, you will behave differently. If you are African, you will behave differently. If you're a South Asian, you will different behave differently. But if you take accounts and a stock of everything, he is not doing something which he has not said he will do. Even when he was the 2017, when he came on January 20th, 2017, the first thing that he announced on January 27th, that eight Muslim countries will not be allowed to enter, or the citizens of those countries are not allowed, just in a week. And later on, he expanded to 13 Muslim countries, quote unquote. So that's the racial tone in which he's approached about migration is unprecedented. With some sort of also you can take it that hasn't done something which Biden administration did not do, or Obama administration did not do. The scale is different for two regions particularly. There was no racial tone in Democrats, policies when it comes to deportations or something like that. Second, that the racial tone basically means that he doesn't differentiate between the immigrants, refugee, and asylum seekers, and that's just some sort of it's a very significant in that way. And and further to that, he is not basically recognizing any asylum seeker or refugee or migrants, whether legal or illegal, as a human being. So in that way, that dehumanization of individuals as a citizen of any part of the world, whether you're a Colombian, or whether you're an Indian, or whosoever he comes from any part of the world. So that dehumanization is quite very popular also. How Twitter giant, he calling somebody like using the phrases like Tom Holland as a czar. So in that way, this is a new grammar of world politics. It's not new order that we are entering into. So, and that's the kind of a one immediate point that I can argue. Further to that, it's not also what about the legal status to that, whether you call it even going back to the 60s and 70s. This is United States law basically, that they are welcoming a lot of people, and then you can argue about that status of legality and otherwise. But then what happened in 2017 also, what we call the Raise Act, and then later on the Dream Act and all of that. So the legality discussions is also very central in arguing about the Trump effect. And in that way, he basically doesn't basically separates between a criminal and human beings. His assumptions and basic hypothesis is that anybody who does not has a $5 million in his pocket is a criminal. That's his basic assumptions, and which is echoed and basically buoyed by Elon Musk, and who himself is an immigrant, by the way. But in that way, he is a rich man. And so, in that way, you can also separate that idea about whether he's against the idea of immigrants, or whether legally or otherwise, or whether he's basically asking that only rich people is allowed. After all, that gold card and $5 million, that's the pocket to enter. So in tomorrow, if you are have a, for example, you are somebody from mafia, and you have done some criminal activities in China or anywhere else, if you have $5 million, there are high chances you could be a citizen in the United States. And so, in that way, what the American policy thinkers and will say that, they're famously Nancy Pelosi, you know, raised at him that you can't say there's a criminals, and he said that silence of the lamb stuff, that everybody is a criminal and everybody is like that. So how would you deal with that in such situation? So it's to give a kind of immediate thoughts of everything. The first is nobody knows that how Trump effect was eventually will really work it out. The second thing is that would be the last time that U.S. hegemony. There is a policy in hegemony, we call it collective goods approach, that those who set the tone have a abide by something, a space where a lot of people can be a freeloader, free rider, because you are the one who has created the system, and you are the one who has to sustain the situation. Now, in that way, this is going to impact Americans in the long run as well. There is a trust deficit, whether it's from Europeans or otherwise. Everybody is very much kind of shock and awe, but there is a trust deficit. And in that way, Americans' power structure is going to big impact in that way. The third is basically when I argued about the criminality and the asylum seekers and everything, you're basically saying that the other parts of the countries, like what happening in Mexico, they have a policy now welcoming everyone, something like that. So we could see that there will be some sort of anti-American feeling across, whether you are immigrants from anywhere, in that way. Uh, Having said all of these, just a footnote here. I'm not suggesting that illegal migrants are allowed anywhere. No country does that. Whether poor or rich, will Saudis allow that? Will India allow that? Will China allow that? No, that's not true. But then there is a system in which you do that, because it's not something that in 1960s and 70s and 80s these countries have approached United States to have that immigration policy. After all, United States by nature is a country of immigrants. It's unlike civilizational state of China, or for that matter India, or for that matter nation states like European nation state system. So there is a nature of state is also quite different when we think about United States. So in that way, in the last couple of years, one aspect which is ideological component of any big powers, that idea of a liberal hegemony is dead. In that way, that whole notions about liberalism, liberal principles, institutionalism, and everything that we talk about, that's the Trump beats of Trump's nationalism and hyper nationalism, or that's way, that's going to kill the liberal hegemony idea also. Now that impact is basically favor the authoritarians across the world. They will further say that okay, there's a Trump is not a president, he's a phenomena. So see that whether Giorgia Meloni in Italy, whether in somebody in Erdogan in Turkey, when Prime Minister Modi in India, they will have a template here. They will say that and the law, because after all, ensuring international law is not just about, it works through consensus, and United States has a big role to play in that. So in that way, international legal norms would be hugely affected. So the ripple effect of the Trump's effect is you make a catalog of it, and you can checklist one, ideological, material, structural, everything, and all fits into that. Now, as an American, hypothetically, what would I think of it? I would basically, if I'm a white for that matter, because there is a reason also that he is basically reaching out to constituencies. If you take the records of 2010 and 22, there is a decline of few percentage of population of non-white, white non-Hispanic, people. So that's also basically he's creating a kind of a sending messages. We are basically what? The identity also plays a lot of role here, and in that way you can't brush aside that his policy is just about money, or in terms of very stringent legal illegal things. There is a racial, there is a populism, everything. And last point, before I can go further and allow you people to join in with me, is that when you do such things, how, on what basis you are asking Egypt and Jordanians to embrace thousands of people from Gaza? Now, there should be some sort of a template on which you can basically argue. So you could have said that what Turkey did after Syrians, they basically embraced thousands of people. So in one way, you are basically telling the world that my way or highway, and you people can't do what you please, what pleases you, but you have to follow whatever I wish. So in that way, I would say that he has basically sending a lot of messages to the world. I think people, somebody in Beijing and somebody in Kremlin, would be very joyous actually in seeing what is happening, the drama all over. They are the country who basically fear not about the might of basically military might of United States. It is about the liberal ideas. Once it is over, then you are not separated from any leader, whether you are democratically elected or not. So in that way, I think somebody in Beijing and somebody in Kremlin would be very happy with all of that. At the last point on the immigration impact and all of that, if we take stock of all of these, which I have really illustrated here, is that I have no clue actually in that way that whether how it that impact in which category, whether the families will be impacted, the birthright children for that will be impacted. What about the legal status of those people who are seeking asylum and they're basically are pending in courts, because he has basically stopped everything. So in that way, what the legal matters would basically discuss these questions of it. So this is not just a political question; these are legal questions also. There is a regional aspects also. There is a global impact going to happen. Whichever way you take it, there will be restructuring of the global structure. There is a rise will be of populism everywhere, and you will see there is a highly anti-immigration across the world, because when you set the tone, the others would follow, and they will have that. You can't go to the league for a legal matter for that. So Trump effect is basically a phenomena. Chaos is the order. Impact is seen. It's like some sort of a, you know, whenever you think of seismography of an earthquake, that it will repeat someday later. So in that way, this Trump impact 2017 return in 2025, and if he stays here for next 4 years till 2029, I think it is a very harsh time for a lot of people who basically were chasing American dreams. So in the last word, Kash Patel has said that when he was accorded a kind of a director FBI and became one of the top face of Trump's administration, he said that I am the beneficiary of American dreams. Maybe he might be the last one. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prem. And last but not least, Alexandra Bowman, what are your thoughts on Trump's immigration policies?
Sure. Well, I want to be upfront that I am a political cartoonist. I put it in my Chiron, so it was clear. And my role is frequently trying to look at narratives that everyday people have and understand what caused those narratives or what's contributing to those narratives. And essentially a lot of my work attempts to understand why are people on an emotional level trying to do things that are so unempathetic. Why are people so eager to cast out somebody or look for reasons to do that? And I understand that like Dr. Prem said, a nation has to have laws, and a nation, borders are important. But the cruelty with which this administration is enforcing that is just motivated by something from the pit, I think. And it's been really concerning for me to see other cartoonists using the argument of common sense and using the argument of like America for Americans, which is old timey, 1910s type stuff, to justify those things. And across the board, in both immigration and other Trump policies, it's been really concerning for me to see, I've been humble about my existing understanding, but I don't think a lot of cartoonists are, and I don't think a lot of people who are loud supporting Trump are either, where they are supporting a policy not because they understand the policy or because they understand the impacts of that policy, but for personal emotional reasons. And voting with your gut is a normal human thing, but right now, when voting with your gut leads you to vote for things that are hateful or have sweeping impacts on people who are vulnerable, that it's just incredibly dangerous. And so, I know this is a youth-founded organization. There's probably a lot of young people watching. So, no matter where you stand politically, I would encourage you to ask yourself, what do I actually understand about these issues? And why am I voting a certain way? Or why am I, having a certain internet identity on one political side or another? And I've found just, obviously I can only speak for myself, but I'm also a college essay tutor because political cartooning does not make money, believe me. And I have to get the money from somewhere. So I've asked students, so why are you interested in politics? Or why are you interested in, XYZ cause on both sides? And, I'll go through a line of questioning because I have to as a college essay tutor. It's a beautiful excuse. And a lot of times it will ultimately come down to like, I want to feel important, or I want to feel like I'm making a difference. And obviously people's core reasons shift, and sometimes they're great at the core and sometimes they're not. But I would really encourage people, especially if you have a public presence where you're influencing people or sharing a belief that people are seeing, to really ask yourself why you're supporting a certain narrative. And I hope that you think about that in terms of the more nuanced political, technical understanding that the other two panelists have shared.
Rami, can I just want to point out something Dr. Prem said that I think really speaks to the ways in which all three of us on this panel are connected. And it's this idea of a change in the grammar. And for the way that Alexandra kind of articulated, it's a change in the narrative around immigration. But these narratives are not new. And they're clear communication tactics in order to create an animosity against a particular group. I always say to young people, if we're creating this narrative, instead of engaging the narrative, try to understand who the narrative is serving. So if we're being told that everyone coming across the border is a criminal, that we need to close off our borders, that Europe is taking advantage of the United States, that Canada and Mexico, we need to all these tariffs, etc. At the end of the day, okay, if that's the narrative, who is the narrative serving? And Dr. Prem also mentioned, with this new gold card instead of a green card, there are other countries that have something similar. They're not $5 million, but similar. But, what is the narrative around that, and who does that narrative serve? And I think when we peel back everything and just look at who these narratives are serving, it's serving, as Dr. Prem pointed out, folks who are white, and it's serving folks who are rich. And that really is, when it comes to policy in the United States, generally, I mean, I would argue that this is just the natural extension of late stage capitalism, and we're hitting that kind of breaking point. But it's always about, you know, when we are entrenched in those narratives, who do those narratives serve? And who do they not serve? Yeah. So I just wanted to, I love this idea of a change in the grammar, and Alexandra's articulation of this is kind of the stories that we're told and how we engage those stories.
Thank you. Oh, and I wanted to jump in on that too. In a very practical sense, based on what Dr. Federer was saying, who is telling you to believe in this narrative and what do they have to gain? Which sounds like it's the same thing, but I'm speaking on very practical terms. Like, is Turning Point USA coming to your college? Like, what do they want you to think and why? Why does someone want, you to believe in a certain narrative? And of course, even if someone has good motives, doesn't always mean they're coming at it from the right place. But thinking about that essence is something that tends to at least put you on the map of being in the right place, I think.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. Those were wonderful introspections. And I'd like to start off in Majlis tradition. I'd like to set the tone and the goals. So so I'd like to set the tone just by starting off by saying, well, before we have this conversation, please try and keep your answers cohesive, but try and keep them as short if you can. I know this is a very complex and nuanced issue. However, I know that some of our panelists are a little short on time, but also please also the whole goal of this Majlis is to have a conversation to get to understand the deeper meanings behind Trump's immigration policies. I know it's something that you would find in a subreddit commentary, but let's just please try to keep it as short as you can. And I'd like to just make a quick announcement to the audience. Anyone, all of our watchers on LinkedIn right now, please feel free to leave questions for our panelists. And okay, I think I've made that part clear. So I would like to turn it over to the one of our moderators, Hafsa. So I will just add her to the stage, and she can ask a question.
Hello, yes, hello everyone. So I was just listening to you all. Great intakes, everyone. I heard Dr. Prem mention that these administration policies, these new immigration policies by the U.S. administration, are going to have long-term consequences, not for the U.S. only, but for everyone globally as well. So I would like for us to follow up on that. How do you think this will affect US's global position? If Brandon or Alexandra can maybe take on that.
Dr. Prem, I'll let you start, and then I'll be happy to jump in. But yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you, Hafsa. I think, see, it's like that. When you set the template, you're just not setting the template in a one way or one direction. Basically, you're restructuring something. So when you have this official position, something like on this very strong immigration or anti-immigration or whatever it is, basically dehumanization policy, rather to say it, then what is happening anyway. Multiculturalism is on a deathbed actually, whether in Europe and across the world. So the one of the immediate impact would be there will be a kind of a, because populism is or right wing or left wing, it is on high in highest in kind of global politics, and that will be used. You need enemy for your political positions. Once it is coming from the higher stage, then you can work at the periphery level very clearly. You will see there will be a rise of extreme violent position in Europe first, then also in a countries wherever you can think of. So it is not just about when we say, it's a it is not a singular kind of impact. The ripple effect will not be just about in one way, that how this populism might lead and having the template in their kind of a backdrop. But then there would be a kind of consequences otherwise also. Education for that matter. A lot of people go to these great colleges and they return for their country, not just for about job or for dignity, but they change the course of a lot of countries because it is uneven development of the world system. But if you reverse it, a kind of that we have nothing to do with that system, then it will be a chaos in a very different ways out. And then it would be kind of a something that would be very difficult to handle. So you can't go to colleges in somewhere in your US for that matter. What if each country start following in? And I think the real thing would be here, if you really want to feel that, then you have to have an official position that United States or Europe or any country will never ever, military or otherwise, intervene in other country to decentralize their system and then expect that there nothing will return to them. So in that way, what I my point here is, this is not just about a simple calculation or mathematics about the impact. The impact assessment could be many, and in that way there will be a industry of hatred. That will be industrial scale you will see in Europe first, because whether in Poland, whether in Sweden, whether in Italy, and everywhere, how would you basically separate the idea between a criminal and somebody who is genuinely seeking, even for education? What if the criminal has millions of dollars? But then how would you separate that idea? So my point here is that once you make a policy, you have to, and you legally basically bind by it, you do not realize the impact of it because it is not announcing by any other normal country. If this announcement would have been done in Russia or in China, or for that matter even in some European countries, whether it's Sweden and Poland, this would not have impacted that way. But we are talking about something which has really set this basically system, and in the reverse way it will impact their country as well in the long run. So that was basic idea was. Thank you.
Brandon,
Brandon can join you.
oh yes, sorry, Brandon, I think you wanted to weigh in.
Yeah, I mean, I think the impact, and something Dr. Prem said earlier about the grammar that we're creating is one of chaos. And I think chaos is exactly the point. I think as a US citizen, the way that this is going to, how it might impact me may be very different than how it impacts the rest of the world. I do think that it provides cover for and fuel to particularly kind of white nationalist groups in Europe to enact similar policies. I think this kind of kowtowing to Russia provides cover to China to do things in Taiwan. I think when the U.S. is positioned as a global leader and the global leader sets the tone of chaos, I think it allows for chaos to spread. What that chaos then looks like in other countries is going to be specific to the challenges that those countries are facing in their own kind of geopolitical interactions. I also, Dr. Prem said earlier that this may be that there's a realignment here, that this may be the end of U.S. hegemony, and I think I don't necessarily know if that's a bad thing, but I think when we engage in this realignment, what then takes over as the kind of hegemonic force around the world. And if we continue to create a narrative of chaos, and if we continue to engage policies that embolden places like Russia and other right-wing parties across Europe, it would seem that hegemony is going to take on that tone. And is that what we really want? So someone like me, I'm all right with the U.S. hegemony falling. I think it's time specifically for the global South to have its day. But I don't necessarily know if that's going to be the outcome of this. And so what are we replacing that hegemony with?
Thank you very much. Alex, do you like to weigh in?
Sure. Well, coming off of some of those descriptions, and again, I'm an English major, so correct me if I'm wrong about any of this. But the just insanity and the chaos that we're describing seems to come with an air of a power trip and a desire for the rest of the world to see that this is a power trip. And what we're seeing with Jeff Bezos's decision yesterday, and I don't want to get this wrong, but from what I read, he's going to focus on publishing op-eds that promote conservative ideas. It was like free markets and one other thing. That is deeply concerning, and it shows, I think, a high level of soft power influence that Trump is having within the United States that's going to affect discourse elsewhere. Because the Washington Post is an American paper, but it has an international influence. I think that just the billionaires lining up to kiss the ring, like in that beautiful Antelnace cartoon that predicted this, and I'm glad she got out of there before this new development. I think we're going to see more people in the US and elsewhere in power bend over to kiss the ring, not because they necessarily agree deep down at their core with the ideas, but because they're scared. And as literature has showed us throughout the centuries, people will do crazy things when they're scared, and that's the culture, the international culture and tone that Trump is setting.
Thank you very much for your answers. It was wonderfully put. So I have a question I'd like to pose to the panelists, and I'd like to ask, do you think that with Trump's mishandlement of U.S. immigration, with ICE raids and with the fear-mongering spread and the culture of chaos, as you've all eloquently put it, do you think this will have a potential domino effect on the immigration practices of the United States, where it could go so far as to say, even if you are like a second or third generation immigrant or the descendant of immigrants, you could also be affected? That's just my first question.
I think it's already having that impact. As families have members who are deported, I'm forgetting his name because I've unfortunately chosen to ignore most of their names, but I believe he's the new director of Homeland Security. Basically said that if you don't want to be separated from your mother, then you can go too. And so I think it's already having that effect. And I'm thinking about earlier, Dr. Prem mentioned the DREAM Act and Dreamers, folks who have been in the United States since they were really young children and have had some protected status over the last several years. Those folks as well are going to get caught up in this, and so I don't know if I completely answered your question, Rami, but I think that it's going to have a ripple effect as it impacts families, etc. But Dr. Prem, did you want to add something there?
Yeah. In a electoral campaign, you use a lot of optics, and that's not official. When you make a policy, you're legally binded. So what basically it means that if I take a pause and think about it, the kind of vocabulary that Trump used during his campaign: shoot in the leg if there you find anyone at the border, or uh, just pour in them some waters were full of crocodiles, something like that, or do whatever you want to do. I want somebody, recently he said that I want somebody who has a lot of money, who comes to US and pay a lot of taxes. So it just means that it's not just about optics. It's not just about popular notions, but these are official positions. And once, United States is not just about any other nation state. It is by far the most powerful country in every sense, not just military or economically. But country becomes powerful not with its might with economy and military, but the ideas that you float into the world. When you basically reverse from it, you are basically asking the world that you can go with the anti-globalization policies. Now, in terms of that, there will be what would happen in countries like, see, recently Pakistan basically expelled thousands of people from Afghanistan. Now, I can understand there is a distinction between burden sharing, because you have a limited resource to cope up with your own challenges. If you go to Lebanon, I've been there a couple of times, and you see that the country is on sale because of Syria. Now, what causes Syria to become that Syria? And in that way, what it means that when you create the chaos, then you don't have to how to control it. That would be the ripple effect. It is not just about anti-immigration across following everywhere in the world, but it will not basically restrict it with that immigration thing. Then people will start thinking, if you have the right to make policies like in your own country, then we will do everything in our own country at the same way. To help with the human rights question, after all, immigration, asylum, refugees, these are very central to human rights and the values that basically given to what we call the age of liberalism. That is basically right. I see you in that manner. So the domino effect is not just you can, check on the immigration policies across the world, but the ripple effect and the domino effect will basically translate into many other sort of policies in different parts of the world. That's the template here. And nobody bake jury is still out in that in which way, in which direction the impact would be assessed. But by far, in a short, I can summarize and can say, with some sort of understanding, this domino effect will further create more chaos. So we basically are entering into not age of region, but age of chaos.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prem. Alex, is there anything you'd like to weigh in here?
Well, I would encourage young people to really, get their information from a variety of perspectives on this. I'm not saying, that, anything. I'm not saying that anything people here are saying here is incorrect. I'm just saying that, I would encourage people to be aware of when they're in an echo chamber, and like I said earlier, be aware of, when all your narratives are coming from one place, especially in the world of social media. Another thing I would share just as a college essay tutor, is that young people tend to use beautiful like chat GPT AI core words to describe giant umbrellas of ideas. The word passion, for example, I tell people, get it out of your essays. Same thing, in terms of glad you liked it. But yeah, I would encourage people to think about what big umbrella words they might be using or that they might receive from people who have a narrative to promote that might like include under them some meaning besides what that big umbrella word might be projecting. And I think Trump is the king of this. Like, make America great again is the big one. Great, what does that mean? Again, what does that mean? What does what the word equality, when Trump uses it, actually mean? What does I think some people who are smarter than Trump sometimes will use the word like real diversity, to describe like a free speech or ideological diversity. And it's kind of very much, and not even an open secret, but an open secret that is absolutely not practically what they are suggesting. So I would encourage people to get their, messaging from a variety of sources, and to be aware of the language that people are using. So that's my, English major suggestion for you all. Think about the messages you're getting, how they're appealing to you, what the other person has to gain. Use that AP English, rhetorical education that you got when you were 16. Be careful out there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prem. Is there something? Is there something you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to take about from what Alexandra just said. Narratives are basically it's a collection of emotions. You can basically create a world view on that narrative, and if that does not translate into what is basically happening in real world, then there is an inner struggle and chaos. So narrative is also not just about propaganda sense, but in terms of creating your own worldview. So my suggestion, I'm not from English major like Alexandra is, but I can say as a teaching faculty here and where young students or PhD students, I think these conversations are not just mere about, you can't stop and hypothesizing a situation that bashing Trump is going to really resolve the matter. The point is these conversations are what we call political education. And these are equally very significant whether you get it from anywhere. So you have to basically reinvent yourself that what basically Donald Trump is doing, or as a phenomena what is happening as immigration, it is not about to develop an anti-American feeling or anti something like that. To basically allow yourself to be more politically educated and think about on a larger perspective, that is that question where we think about whether cosmopolitan sensibilities or human race question, these are value systems are very significant. There is nothing wrong in having American dreams everywhere, but at the same time, not by bashing Trump or bashing United States in that way, but getting more political educated and create that awareness, so that there should be some sort of a civil society engagement, and that discussions could be very high value in within United States, so that there are certain some of the things that Trump administrations are forced to reposition itself. So that would be the best way to having these conversations. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to add to that, because I think that this very idea of we can spend an entire several days bashing the policies, bashing Donald Trump. The Harris campaign made their kind of last call to voters, really doubling down on Trump is a dictator and bashing Trump. And I think that is not going to solve the issue. What solves the issue is really understanding the anxieties that led people to vote for Donald Trump, and now understanding the anxieties that are being created as a result of his policies. In the work that we do in training young people around the world to facilitate, we often have them engage people's interests rather than their positions. And this comes down to something that Dr. Prem was saying about worldviews, and connects back to Alexandra in terms of narratives, is what people were voting with. And Alexandra said this earlier, that people vote with their gut. That gut is their emotional response to what's happening in their own lives at this particular moment. People were feeling anxious about the economy, and the Biden administration and subsequently the Harris campaign kept telling Americans that, it was getting better. It was getting better. It's good. It's good. But for people, when they go to the grocery store and they're paying $15 for a carton of eggs, it doesn't feel that way. And so if we are actually going to counter Trump and then eventually counter his policies, we have to first recognize the actual anxieties that are driving people towards the right wing, as opposed to towards policies that will better them. We have to start getting at their interests, what's motivating them. And we're not going to get that by simply bashing Trump or bashing the United States. We have to start creating an uplifting message that engages people's actual concerns, their motivations, and their anxieties, so that we can create something different than what we're getting right now.
Thank you.
Could I jump in real quick on that? So I actually gave a TED Talk on that topic in college. And, my thesis, the title of it was called How to Talk Politics, parenthetical, Productively. And my thesis was, no one is going to respond well to being told they're wrong to their face. So you can believe that someone is a racist. You can believe that someone is, a bigot in some way. And just because you don't say it to their face while trying to understand them doesn't mean that they are not a bigot, or that you don't believe they're not a bigot. But I think generally speaking, don't try to let someone know that you think that they are a cruel, terrible person if you're trying to convince them of the facts that would suggest that maybe they are. So be very careful to, work with the golden rule, I'd say, in conversations with those across the aisle. And, even there, have conversations with those who believe different things than you. I have this one friend from middle school who, and sometimes the friendship's been stretched, but he put his resume in for Project 2025. And I've had friends go like, why are you still friends with him? And honestly, just he, like me, is a Christian, and he is like the most tolerant. I know it's weird. He is the most tolerant Trump supporter I've ever seen. Like, he believes that my beliefs are understandable and where they come from. And, because, his family are Mongolian immigrants who fled communism, I think it makes sense that that's where he is. I think it's terrible that he is where he is. But he sent me like a cat meme the other day that was like, I am rooting so hard for your flourishing. I was like, that's really cool that, I think you are dead wrong and he thinks I'm dead wrong. But we can, are learning a lot about the other side from our relationship. And he's also just fun to chat with. And we had like an 8-hour coffee over winter break. And I'm grateful for that because I want to better understand, why people are going to that level of an extreme. Not just so I can intellectualize it and lecture them with my Substack essays, but so that I can really understand the emotional core of where they're coming from. And, I sent this streaming link to my friend. He's on the West Coast, so he'll see it in a few hours. But, I understand where he's coming from. I think he's wrong. And I think that you can have that attitude when you're talking with people who believe different things from you. And you don't have to end that discussion with, and by the way, you're still a bigot, close this window. You don't have to do that. You can believe that. They probably know, if you're on the left, they probably know what you think of them. So I would go out of your way to say that, like, I really want to understand you, So I would encourage that degree of human empathy in those discussions because, on a very practical level, we are not getting anywhere unless, people start across demographics and ages really start trying to understand where people are coming from.
Thank you, Alexandra. That was really beautifully put. So I'd like to pass it over to Hafsa, who has a question who she'd like to pose.
Yes, I assume that all other guests would love to jump in on what Alexandra was saying, but we have some comments from the audience in the chat. So I would like to pose the questions for the guest speakers. The first one is from Ayumide. He asks, what impact would the immigration policy have on countries in the global south? Would it foster realignment with countries like China, Russia? And we have another question from Azra Shahab. She is asking how the new immigration policies affect the contemporary world order. So I think we can first take Ayumide's question. If someone would like to take on that, perhaps Dr. Prem. Dr. Prem,
Yeah,
over to you.
yeah. So I think to jump in and to I think to some take a kind of a view on both the questions and try to connect that. I think let me start with what response to Azra's question about the world order thing. I think world order is also based on not just about certain principles, certain ideas, certain ideologies. When there's nothing matters, then there is a order is just a chaos. So it basically it means that it would be a kind of a very different sort of an entry into an order where there is no some sort of a structure based on certain norms, identity, principles. There would be kind of an impact would be that there would be delegitimizations of institutions like United Nations or international legal norms, amnesty. Already there are so many other things which are affected badly. The second thing would be it would empower the non-democratic forces, not just electorally elected people's democratic, I meant, but the entire aspects of democracy which works in different parts of the world, even at the street. So that impact would be kind of because it comes from the top, and the people basically bit follow it. So once you have an impact on the order, it doesn't mean it will have just a political ramifications. There will be a social ramification. There would be age of violence in a lot of parts of the world. There would be a kind of a industrial scale of hatred industry will rise up. So in that way, say the in that way the assessment of that world order would be first, you don't know basically that what sort of a norms and regulations and ideology would be a defining feature. Second thing is that authoritarianism and certain kind of an excessive, or it not just a optics, but it will be defining feature of that order. So in that way, that's the second. And third would be that if the institutions and the consensus are not basically, or if the nationalism supersedes globalism in every sense of it, then you might see that a lot of the violence would be happen at any level. Majoritarianism will go rise up in different parts of the world, because after all, when you say that it is my right to decide what sort of a policy that I need to follow, then you won't leave that when it comes to kind of a global consensus, what sort of a human rights is. A lot of countries will basically accept this fact that, okay, fine, we will redefine the idea of human rights. As a maid, you are redefining your things. So it would not be just at the border, within borders also. There will be a majoritarian tyranny, and that will impact a kind of a very different. If you're a minority anywhere of the world, you will basically in a very shock that these effects will basically go that far. So world order would be kind of a full of uncertainty, chaos, lot of violence, restructuring, less democratizations, uh, institutional consensus will be basically compromised, all sort of that. And it would have a material disadvantages also. You cannot produce a lot of cultural values in that way. So that's the kind of immediate thought on the aspects of what Ayomide has. What impact would the immigration policy have on countries in the global south? Look, there is a two set of response to that. There is a lot of dependency. When you post-colonial outlook, there's a lot of countries do not have that sort of a structure where they can be basically empower themselves without having any sort of dependency. So a lot of countries in global south are still highly dependent on for many things. And then what is basically happening, that elites will have a more say in terms of basically about in terms of engaging with those sort of constituencies. You might face that global south might further descent into less democracy. After all, democracy is not just an idea, it is a process also. So when you have such policies which looks that it's from popular choice, but then other countries which does not have does not have that sort of a democratic structure, that will basically empower those constituencies in that. So global south also is going to be badly affected. You see in Bangladesh what is happening. There will be a further chaos. In Pakistan, you might see there will be further chaos. Within India, you will see their high optics of majoritarianism will go up, and so on and so on. What is happening in Sri Lanka, for that matter? So these orders, when they get restructured, they impacts on every scales. And as I said earlier, that from which location you are, that basically shapes the narrative. And in that way, if you are from global south, then you are equally burdened with this idea of what is happening in Mexico right now. Thank you.
We'll hand it over to perhaps Brandon or Alexandra if you'd like to take on the questions as well.
I don't have much to add on that one. I don't think. Alexandra, I don't know if there's something you would add.
Nope. You got it. You covered it.
All right then. Okay, so Rami, do we have any more questions?
Well, I had one question. Do you believe that Trump's immigration policies and his policies as a whole, do you think that they are sort of fed by this neo culture of a sort of fake Christian white supremacist ideology, where the white and rich have all the power and everyone else is just bottom tier, so to speak? I apologize for the lack of a better phrase. Do you think like this, that the culture that influences his policies, do you think the culture influences policies? I'm very sorry for my brain's everywhere.
I'm not sure if I fully have what you're saying. I mean, I think that Trump is merely a means to an end. I think for Trump, he cares very little about anything other than his own enrichment and his ability to be seen on television and to be kind of admired by large groups of people. I think the authors of Project 2025, I think there are threads of white nationalism and kind of a white Christian nationalism as part of that. But I think that what we're starting to see and it became very clear at the inauguration as all of the tech billionaires kind of lined up next to Trump, is there's this underlying ideology that's been in the tech world for a while with folks like Peter Thiel. I'm forgetting another one of their names, but the idea is to kind of replace replace democracy with more of a kind of corporate order, wherein instead of states, we have communities that all work for specific corporations. There's a certain kind of techno thing that's happening now that I don't have all of the information on, but I think that I think the Christian stuff is really just a way of pulling in particular groups more than it is kind of kind of central to the ideology. I think it's a way of using certain communities to advance other things rather than kind of a central tenet of the ideology. I think it's more about an enriching of a particular oligarch or like a certain class of people. Alexandra, it seemed like you had something you wanted to add there, and I would love to hear your thoughts.
Oh, sorry. I there was a pause. I didn't want to interrupt you, but yeah, I mean, just I said earlier that I'm a Christian too, and just like maybe it's a tenet of conservatism that immigration should be limited. It is certainly not a tenet of Christianity. My goodness. Christianity probably leans more towards the open border side of things than the opposite. So not to get on too much on this soapbox, but it makes me just so devastated what Trump has done for the reputation of Christianity. And I kind of believe, and my faith kind of teaches me, unless you're, a Calvinist, that, he might be doing eternal damage here. So, it really drives me crazy and makes me furious that he's creating this reputation for Christians, and I'm grateful that Biden was Catholic. Anyway, yeah, that makes me very upset.
Hey, Rami, if you allow me to join this, just want to say something here.
Please.
Yeah, you know, whatever Trump is doing as a phenomenon, this is nothing about Christianity. I mean, Christianity is, love your neighbor, thy love yourself, salvation. All of that. The foundation of Christianity is love. In that way, what basically doing Trump or kind of him is basically racial, yes, but nothing religious about it. If he cares about religion, he will use it as optics, like most politicians do. So there is nothing Christian or quote unquote Christian value system about it. That in that way, Christianity in by nature, with whatever categorization they had to face across the world in as optics or whatsoever, they are the ones who have reached out to the major parts of the world for their value system in reaching out for human race, basically, with education, health, and everything. Yes, people may say them that they have been used, or that has been used for some other purposes. Yes, colonialism has used or misused the idea of Christianity. So is basically these what, but this is basically racial, and there you have to separate the idea of race and culture and religion here.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, he's using a lot of optics, basically, because once you create that religious fervor, then you get more legitimacy. So what white supremacism is not about Christian values, but it using Christian values as a legitimacy for own sort of a kind of a propaganda machine that you can think. And in that way you create the binary. White supremacism is all about Christian values, and anything whatever I'm basically doing is basically kind of enlarging that. But it's unlike it. It's a blasphemous in that way. It's the same way what a sections of white supremacism or Christian Zionist, what we say, believe in Armageddon theory that Christ will return and two-thirds of Jews has to kill in Jerusalem, kingdom of God will return, something like that. These are loaded things which are part of narratives. And I don't think so by any stretch of imagination there is anything about Christianity here which teaches what is happening about migration or Trump's phenomena in that way. Yes.
Thank you
All
very
right. Well said. I know that we are heading towards the end of this session, Rami, but there is one more question we have from Christos. He is asking, do you think that the extreme aspects of the MAGA immigration policies will also be copied by extreme right leaders fond of Trump. Do you have a take?
I
Probably.
think I think Alexandra might best chip in because I have
Go on
already
ahead.
discussed on that point in quite, and I've already explained that impact and right wing leaders, initially in initial remarks. Alexandra, if you want to put it something differently.
Oh, just yeah, probably. 'Cause, yeah, because America is such a global leader, and Trump is scary, and I think people are going to want to follow suit, and they're going to like how other people are bending to Trump, the strong man who presents himself in a certain way and uses religion to justify his beliefs and policy practices, and gets new followers because of that. They're going to want that power for themselves. And again, this comes down to human nature. It doesn't matter if it's wrong. I think humanity inherently leans toward being, sinful and being eager to accumulate power for themselves. And anything that works to get that power is going to be something that people around the world are going to want to emulate. Oh, and one thing very quickly, kind of related to
Mhm.
that on the religion front, and I know that someone here had to run at 10, so I want to keep it brief. But religion is so useful of a means of getting people to kowtow, because if you appeal to people's deepest beliefs about the deepest things about their eternal destination, or their role on this planet, that were already ingrained in them from like age 5, that is going to be one of the most useful tactics you can get for getting people to agree with you. If you make your narrative that you're the party that God and Jesus would approve of the most, and you make that work for a large population, you can do untold damage. And so I think that in itself, that phenomenon is likely the main domino that's leading to all those other impacts around the world, honestly, is what Trump has done to use religion for his own selfish purposes. And it's just awful. I was watching Good Omens yesterday, and I kept thinking, man, maybe the end of the world is coming. I don't know. Yeah, he's doing a pretty good
Maybe.
job of bringing everything down. I don't know. But anyway, thank you.
All right. So one more real quick I'd like to ask. How do you think that these policies can be modified or maybe reversed in the future, or do you guys even see US heading towards that?
I'll jump in, and I think it kind of speaks back to some of the stuff Alexandra was saying about narratives, and connects back to
Mhm.
the opening comments by Dr. Prem, kind of the grammar of all of this and the way that we're communicating and shaping it. Uh, I think that we are going to continue to see the enactment of these types of policies if we don't address the root anxieties that people have around immigration. So if we're the only reason that these policies are able to be enacted, and the only reason that people are voting or voted for these types of policies, is because they're being given an answer for their economic anxieties and their anxieties in general. That answer is the age old, it's this guy's fault, it's this person's fault. We've seen it happen again and again. And if we just actually start tending to examining and attempting to create ways to address the actual anxieties of people, they themselves will respond negatively to these policies as they see them. But they're not going to if that's the only answer they're given for their own challenges. They're going to see it as maybe a bad thing, but a necessary thing if we're going to make things better for me as an American. I think we have to address these core issues in order for us to actually get people to start challenging the narratives that are being communicated right now and the policies that are being enacted as a result of those narratives.
I'll
Mhm.
just add a point here. What Brandon said. In a very Foucauldian sense, resistance is not separated from power. So whenever there is a power, there is a resistance. Already you American civil liberties unions, there are a lot of legal bodies, even sections of Democrats. They're quite unequivocal in kind of opposing what Trump's ideas and policies are. So it's not just that it is it is something within United States also. They are also processing what is Trump phenomena is. It is not just from the outside; it is from within also. And there are many constituencies within United States which are not going to take it as a it doesn't matter to us. These civil liberties union and so on. There are so many of the things, and those idea of resistance basically connects a lot of people across the world. So in whichever way one can think of whatever we are doing, even it's sort of immaterial for a lot of things. If we try to see that why we are basically coming together here, because somewhere we are concerned citizens across the world, and that's precisely the reason we are talking. Similarly, there are thousands of people within us and across different ways. There might be sections of Republicans also. They might think this is an extreme policy which is going to hurt them badly later on, because there are a lot of people who are very religious and they believe in humanity, not just in Trump. So
Mhm.
so there will be resistance is always where there is a power race, and those resistance will create their own sort of a constituencies, and in that way those meaningful discussions will create further sort of interlinkages of many civil societies groups. Media for that matter will have to be actively play a very different role, not just very particularly alternative media. So we will definitely see that, and I am not very hope is a good thing. Famously of Shawshank Redemption's idea that hope is a good thing is perhaps the best of the things, and it changes every way. So in that way, my last point here is that uh, you cannot think about that this is going to be the last of the story. This is a very chaotic story, but as once Foucault also said that you don't know the next chapter until you turn it. So we keep changing the next page of that book that we are living in, that we call it world, and in that way hope is a good thing.
Lovely, lovely. Well said. So over to you, Rami.
Okay, well, I'd like to say thank you to all our panelists. I really do. I'd like to just give a little bit of my own thoughts on the matter. I do agree with the whole that religion is more used as a tool, because I personally don't think that Trump himself believes in honestly anything except the power of the almighty dollar. But I could just be oversimplifying that very much. But then again, I would agree that a lot of right wing leaders around the world, there's a lot of them popping up. There's the rise of populism, not just here in Europe, but there's also in Latin America. We've seen Javier Milei in Argentina. There's Mahendra Modi in India with his Hindutva policy and the sort of militant branch of the RSS, where they attack Muslims and other religious groups in India. And I'm sure there are many others that I'm probably missing, like Viktor Orban in Hungary, Erdogan in Turkey. I'm probably oversimplifying this quite a lot. But I would like to say thank you very much to all our guests. I will now close this majlis. I will say thank you all for giving up part of your day to come and talk to us and having this very engaging conversation. I really wish we could have made it longer. I'm just trying to be
Yeah.
wary of all your times. So I'd like to thank Dr. Brandon, Alexandra Bowman, and Dr. Prem in India. And I would like to thank everyone who's been watching on LinkedIn and giving us questions. And yeah, I'd like to thank everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our very first event.
Thank you. Pleasure to be in conversation on this event, and especially a pleasure to be in conversation, Alexandra and Dr. Prem, with the two of you.
Yes, pleasure is same here, all mine, and I think I echoed a lot of sentiments raised here. And what Alexandra just wrote, that I'm going to get that on a throw pillow. So that beautiful note. Yeah.
You said hope
So
is the best of the things, and I
yeah.
mean I need to get that on a throw pillow. That was good.
Lovely.
I always say, remember that hope isn't something that we just have. It's something we have to practice every day. Hope is a discipline that requires that so sometimes we need it on a throw pillow so that we can remind ourselves each day that we need to practice it.
So
Yes, and
thanks
hope.
Rami, thank Hafsa and the team basically to bring us and giving this opportunity. Thanks Alexandra and Brandon for sharing that platform, and I really keep this in my heart. And it was lovely. Thank you for the wonderful evening.
Thank you,
Yes,
everyone.
thank you to, or thank you so much, you guys. Like, it was lovely having you all here with us. And jumping in on the hope situation, we can move back to our very first quote that we shared, that for myself, I am an optimist. It does not seem to be much use to be anything else, by Winston Churchill. So hope is all we have, and
Yeah.
we can continue doing that. Um,
Imagine. Just go and see, listen that song, Imagine, and then you will feel that.
Yes, and I'd like to end off by saying that hope is not just something we heard during the Obama administration. It is something
Yes.
we all need to hold inside. So thank you to everyone who's watching. Thank you to the panelists for organizing time, and I want to thank my team as well for helping me through this very first event. I will now I'm going to now end the stream. So thank you all for watching.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.